Mass Peace Action, Progressive Democrats of America, the Massachusetts chapter, Our Revolution in Massachusetts, Citizens for Public Schools, and the Cambridge Residents Alliance. My name is Jonathan King. I'm co-chair with Rosemary Keene of Mass Peace Action. And I'm, oops, wait a minute, this is Carol Doherty. Hello. Carol, we're sending you the link. Okay, so look for it in your email. Great. All right, Carol Doherty, former president of the Mass Teachers Association. I'm also on the board of Citizens for Public School and Cambridge Residents Alliance. I want to just thank, we had a good program committee, did a lot of work. Lisa Guisbond, Drew King, Alan Jalen, and Cole Harrison, and they put this together. So here we are in the midst of this terrible COVID-19 pandemic. Many have asked how come in the richest country on earth, we didn't have enough masks, ventilators, gowns, other PPE, or vaccines or drugs in the pipeline. And one of the major reasons is the diversion of the nation's wealth into ever more expensive and destructive foreign wars, ever more expensive and deadly weapon systems, nuclear war submarines, more B-52 bombers, new intercontinental ballistic missiles, all under the radar. Most people don't know that this is how their tax dollars are being spent. In fact, for most Americans, more than half of the income tax dollars you sent to the federal government was spent on preparations for war and new weapons. And in 100 years of collecting income taxes, the federal government has never reported back to taxpayers how the money is being spent. They keep that pretty quiet, in fact. So this original campaign, which was developed by the Nuclear Disarmament Working Group of Mass Peace Action, originally focused on the multiple aspects of the civilian economy, which were being starved by the war budget. That undermines federal support for housing, for healthcare, for K-12 education, for sustainable energy, for environmental protection. So we had, our slogans were, subways, not submarines, and housing, books, not bombs, housing, not bombs, mines, not missiles. But when the pandemic broke out, we thought, we got to focus on healthcare. Right, healthcare, public health, biomedical research. That's what people are really hurting from. And so we launched this campaign, which right now is an educational, but in a month it'll be a political campaign. Fund healthcare, not warfare. Now you may ask, if the focus is on healthcare, why are we holding a session on public education? It's because in the real world, these two cannot be separated. For a family without health insurance, a child in a family without health insurance, their children's health depends on access to a school nurse, to mental health counselor, to a parent liaison. Absent that safety net, these kids have hardly any chance of getting decent health care. If you think about the consequences, then they end up getting sick, from all of the illnesses and diseases that plague people in our society. If they're sick, they can't go to school, they can't get educated. And then, their ability to grow into productive citizens and societies really held back. And then the third thing, if our citizens don't know the difference between bacteria and viruses, if we don't know that vaccines kickstart the body's own immune system, if we don't understand that the patent system allows the pharmaceutical industry to gouge us on prices, we can't advocate with our elected officials for the policies that we need, and we'll never get an adequate healthcare system. So we really can't separate, these issues. Now, before I turn to our panelists, I want to note, in the earliest phases of this fund healthcare, not warfare system, we, at least in Peace Action, we were focused on foreign wars, the 800 bases around the world, the new nuclear weapons, the danger of Trump starting a nuclear war. But with the recent social mobilization in response to the murder of George Floyd and too many others, we realized we also mean no warfare in our streets, no armored vehicles, no tear gas launchers, no assault weapons provided by Pentagon contractors to our police department. So no warfare anywhere. Martin Luther King, 50 years ago, when he stepped out to express his opposition to the war in Vietnam, he was very clear that, you know, there's no peace abroad, no peace at home, and no peace at home, no peace abroad. The two things are tightly coupled. So let me move to introducing our panel. I'm going to introduce them all at once, and then we're going to go through them. They'll speak sequentially, and then at the end, Drew will take questions in the chat. We're delighted to have with us Merrie Najimy, president, 110,000 member Mass Teachers Association, ardent advocate for public education, coming from 3 decades as a classroom teacher, first elected 2018 and re-elected in 2020. All right. Lisa Guisbond, executive director of Citizens for Public School. She was an early parent leader in the original statewide movement for testing reform and against public privatization. She, my wife, Jackie King, their buddy, Larry Ward, traveled around the state from community to community, meeting with parents and teachers and explaining to them that this high stakes test that had put in place by the hedge fund managers put on the Board of Education was not in the interest of their children. It's been a long struggle, but we're going to hear now about it coming to fruition. Zach Beers has been the executive director of PHENOM, the Public Higher Education Network of Massachusetts, since 2017. Before that, he worked as a communicator for American Federation, AFSCME, State Council on Municipal Employees. And Zach has recently been elected as a Medford City Councilor. Way to go, Zach. Suzie McGlone is a 6th grade humanities teacher at Orchard Gardens in Boston. She's a community leader for educational and social justice. She's active in Citizens for Public School, and she's also active in the Poor People's Campaign, which is how I know her, from Poor People's Campaign's webinars. And then Evelyn Reyes has served as a student representative to the Boston School Committee, a member of the Boston Student Advisory Council, and recently graduated from O'Brien School of Math and Science. Way to go. By the way, Evelyn won't be the last speaker. Zach will be the last speaker before we go to the questions. Now, I'm not sure if Carol Doherty is on, but Carol Doherty was the president of the MTA decades back. Lives in Southeast Mass in Taunton, was on the school committee, and she recently got elected to the state legislature. So we know that we're going to have some champions in there. And at the end, if Carol gets on, I'm going to ask her to say a few words. So, Merrie, kick it off.
Good evening, everybody. It's really an amazing group of people to speak with and to speak to. I want to pick up on some of the themes that Jonathan just introduced to us. This is our moment where the society is asking questions and making connections. This is the time for us as a nation, as a country, as a global set of citizens to really understand and make connections between the economic system of capitalism that was built on white supremacy, that dehumanizes people of color, and structural racism in public education. Structural racism is a system, and the way that it manifests in school is it's a system that divests in public schools, leaving students of color to languish in rodent and mold infested buildings, militarizing schools with security systems and police instead of fortifying them with student support services and education support professionals, subjecting students to rigid accountability systems, operating on a curriculum, a Eurocentric curriculum, measuring so-called performance by standardized testing that was founded in the eugenics movement, constructing a pipeline to prison instead of to college and dignified employment, and marking districts as failed and turning them over to privatization. The Fund Our Future campaign when it began, was intended to expose structural racism in education. And now COVID-19 has pulled back the curtain fully. So we see it laid bare. Winning the Student Opportunity Act was the legislators' unconditional commitment, codified into law, to begin to dismantle structural racism in public education through funding. So how has remote learning been going? First of all, we have to disabuse ourselves of this term that this was remote learning. It really was crisis teaching, and we weren't teaching our best, and our students were not learning. No one is doing well. No one has been doing well. We are in the last weeks of school, but our students of color particularly, and our students in low-income communities, our immigrant students and students with special needs have been disproportionately impacted by crisis teaching. So we hear across the state that there is low participation rate. Some students, particularly immigrant students, whose families may be undocumented and have lost their jobs, have held on to their jobs as essential workers in supermarkets, for example, and they have to work, so they're not available to participate in school during the crisis. For some students living in poverty, school was the safest place for them to be. And now they are home living in circumstances of trauma and being re-traumatized every day. Despite city's best efforts to get technology into the hands of families in low-income communities, connectivity wasn't there. And when you give people new devices without tech support, people are left on their own to try to figure it out. You combine that with densely populated living complexes, multiple families in the same home, and the learning environment is not conducive. Everybody's trying to teach and learn and work at the same time. Nobody's winning. And now the final blow to public education is this massive wave of pink slips or layoff notices that have been going out for 2 weeks, and that we will have our final numbers tomorrow. But in a city like Pittsfield, 140 educators have gotten pink slips. Randolph, they've cut their entire art and physical education program. Brookline, 300 plus, and when the Brookline educators started fighting back, the city started finding money, but they still want to take out of the teachers' backs, the funds to bring everybody back. So we're talking in many cities across the state, 3-4 dozen to several hundred educators being laid off. So we're also now hearing from the state we're entering into a moment where we are preparing to reopen everything, including schools. What is that going to take? We have to center the wellness of our students and our educators in all of our plans. And educators, students, and their families have to be central to making the decisions about what conditions are right for returning to school. We need to have serious conversations about defunding police and refunding schools. And what does that actually mean? That idea has to be explored deeply. It means redefining what we think safety is and what safety is in school. It means identifying what resources do our students need to keep them safe and what resources are not keeping them safe. Police in schools, metal detectors, and divert funds from those things to put them into more staff, not less, more nurses. We're going to need at least a nurse in every building, and in our communities of color, there isn't one. We're going to need more counselors, more custodians. We have to preserve the arts. I just 5 minutes ago across my screen came the headlines from American schools and universities that reopening means an additional $1.8 million in costs for average size school districts, administrators estimate. We're going to need childcare for our families who have to return to work while their students are going back to school. We're going to need childcare for our educators who, if they have to be teaching on a day when their own children have to be home, somebody needs to take care of their children. We need to lay down the gauntlet. This is no time for MCAS. We need to abolish MCAS so that we are not going back to the rat race in school that has narrowed the purpose of curriculum, has stressed everybody out, and has narrowed the purpose of what school is about. So how do we do this? We have to raise funds. And we keep hearing this notion of shared sacrifice. Well, guess what? The only people who are not sacrificing are the billionaires. We have to balance the budget on the backs of the millionaires and the billionaires, of which 16 out of 17 billionaires who live here in Massachusetts have increased their wealth by 11 billion, that's B, since between March and May. Our legislators have the ability and the obligation to raise progressive revenues. Mass Budget has laid out a series of 14 ways that we could tax wealthy individuals and corporations. Zach may talk about some of those details, so I won't spoil the surprise. But the money exists. It's time to fund our future. It's time to really examine and start to dismantle structural racism in our schools, but also in the broader society. And we know, our mantra, the Red for Ed movement, is when we fight, we win. And now more than ever, we need the biggest fight of our lives, and we can win the biggest fight of our lives too. Thank you, Jonathan.
Thank you, quite inspiring. Let's move right on to Lisa Guisbond.
Thanks, Jonathan, and thanks, Merrie, for painting such a clear picture of what's going on with our educators and students and families. It's great to be here with this wonderful panel of speakers at this critical moment for our schools and our communities. As Merrie mentioned, the COVID pandemic has both exposed and worsened educational and societal inequities, highlighting huge gaps in access to food, healthcare, housing and job security, and broadband internet technology. The uprising for Black Lives has focused the nation's attention on police brutality and brought together an unprecedented, powerful, multiracial movement for justice. The intersection of these two crises has highlighted the need to address students' and families' basic needs and systemic racism as it plays out in our schools and society at large, as Merrie mentioned. For educators, students, and families, these intersecting crises have created an urgent need to ensure that schools are not once again placed under austerity conditions, but again, as Merrie said, progressive revenue must be raised and can be raised to keep the promises the state made with the recently passed Student Opportunity Act, especially the promises made to our long underserved communities. It also means we must prioritize educational approaches and policies that address real needs, including physical, mental, and emotional health. We must jettison expensive and destructive, and yes, racist policies like high-stakes standardized testing. Some of you may be familiar with the work of Ibram X. Kendi, who wrote Stamped from the Beginning, The Definitive History of Racist Ideas in America. And Kendi said of high-stakes testing, quote, "Standardized tests have become the most effective racist weapon ever devised to objectively degrade Black minds and legally exclude their bodies." I just want to repeat that. Standardized tests have become the most effective racist weapon ever devised to objectively degrade Black minds and legally exclude their bodies. And I repeat that because we've been hearing this narrative for decades now that the tests are supposed to sort of ameliorate racist outcomes in our society, but the opposite is true. So CPS and our allies successfully campaigned this year to suspend this spring's MCAS tests, generating more than 5,000 emails and hundreds of phone calls to legislative and state leaders. But the Education Commissioner and the Board of Ed did not take action for next year's tests, which should also be canceled. As I wrote in a recent letter to the editor, scores from tests next spring would be measuring wealth and privilege even more starkly than MCAS tests usually do. The results would lack validity or comparability with prior or future years. They would not tell us which students responded with courage, creativity, and compassion to this crisis, or what they learned in the process. That's why CPS, with our allies at the MTA, the AFT, MEJA, and PHENOM, is launching a campaign for a multi-year moratorium on high-stakes testing. And CPS will soon be releasing a report looking at the impact of more than 20 years of Massachusetts testing policies on efforts to address race-based gaps and opportunity. The bottom line is that rather than close such gaps, our punitive testing regime has cemented inequities in place. Every year we hear claims that thanks to testing and standards, Massachusetts schools and students have come a long way, reaching the top of the heap among the states. But the truth is that Massachusetts schools have always been at or near the top, because what standardized testing does best is measure wealth and privilege. And Massachusetts has a relatively affluent and educated population. And the truth also is that we have always had large gaps in opportunity and achievement. So each year when the scores are released, we hear acknowledgements that our gaps are still too large and we have a long way to go to reach equity. CPS board member Ricardo Rosa says, those are like the words of an abuser who consistently apologizes for the abuse but promises to do better, to be better next time. The evidence is in. High stakes testing doesn't help. It degrades education quality overall, narrowing and dumbing down curriculum to test prep rather than engaging exploration. But it is most likely, as Merrie said, to hurt students of color, low income, English language learners, and students with disabilities. So why are we still spending more than $30 million a year, much more than $30 million a year for this failed policy? This needs to change. And for the first time in many years, I see very hopeful signs that it will, and with all of your help. So I invite you to visit the CPS website, join our mailing list, follow us on Facebook and Twitter, so you will know what you can do to help as our campaign rolls out in the next couple of weeks. Thanks.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you. I know it's going to be an exciting time. Suzie, let's take the mic.
Hi, I'm Suzie McGlone. I currently teach at Orchard Gardens, which is a K-8 school in Roxbury in Boston. And I teach 6th grade humanities. And when Lisa pointed out Ibram Kendi, and he's actually coming to teach at Boston University, I'm excited about that, but I don't think Boston Public Schools personally can handle him because he's saying so much truth. And we have a hard time swallowing, or some aspects of it, I have a hard time swallowing it. But I have loved his book, and I know his book is sold out all over the place. So if people are looking for another book to read, it's from 2014, but my colleague and friend Jose Vilson from the Bronx, New York, wrote This Is Not a Test, a new narrative on race, class, and education. So I recommend that book for people who are interested in exploring more about testing and its effects on our children and our communities. And I won't repeat, I'll try not to repeat too much of what has already been said here, because what both Merrie and Lisa have pointed out are aspects of things that are happening as well in my school and community. Before we had the COVID pandemic, my school has been for the last several years in the middle of the opioid pandemic because we are a block away from Boston Medical. I walk to school. I live about a mile from my school. All of my students who are in middle school have to walk to school. And, you know, there was already a huge public health crisis that was obvious for us as we walked by every morning, the effects of being right at ground zero of that, you know, including seeing people selling, using, being affected from, you know, so there was that healthcare crisis. You know, in our schoolyard, we've had needles all over the playground, human defecation on, so I mean, there has been a big health crisis. And that's just a sliver of one that's been affecting my school since before COVID. And now, of course, there's this whole new factor added on top of that. And, you know, when we think of how, like Lisa said, a minimum 30 million is being spent on MCAS. I mean, there's a lot more because there's a lot more time and resources that get thrown into it. So much emphasis that really, you know, our kids were living around these needles and stuff for about 5 years until a group, well, previous year, there was a group of 8th grade students at our school who had tried to do something about it, and of course the school nurse. But last school year, a group of parents meeting in my classroom decided that's what they really wanted to focus on. And those parents I've really appreciated throughout the years, because we've been meeting in my classroom for about the last 4 or 5 years, once a month or so. And that's where I find hope in all of this. I'm really hoping that the public schools, especially in Boston and other urban districts that may block out the community, really welcome the parents in as thought partners. You know, people have always said this stuff about parent engagement. I don't like the word engagement. I like the phrase parent involvement. I think it needs to go back to parents being directly involved in the schools. I think, you know, the teaching online, or, you know, whatever we're going to label it, it has been difficult, but the bright spots are now I've gone up to weekly parent meetings because parents can meet easier on Zoom. Parents have a lot of ideas. I don't feel that parents are being listened to. I mean, even at my school, we've had a governing board that hasn't even met legally for 5 years. And that's the place where the parents are supposed to have their voices. So I'm hoping we can learn a lot of really great lessons from really listening to the communities and the parents who live in the community and the families, because they actually know best in a lot of ways of how to solve this. And many of the parents and the community members speak 2, 3, and 4 languages and can just think of more efficient and better ideas for what opening days are going to look like if they're, you know, if they're allowed to work with the schools and the administrators and on a higher level, and not just be, you know, brought in to be broadcast at when announcements are made. So one hope that I have for this time is that we're really going to take community seriously, especially, like I said, in my district in Boston, where I think it will be a necessity, because I don't see how we can ignore the families the way we have been in the past. And again, I can't speak for all Boston schools, but for what I've seen at my school and in many schools, and not take the feedback and the ideas, because we actually have a really important and relevant and intelligent resource that we do not use enough. So I'm hoping that will be focused on more in this time, because like was mentioned before, you know, I have a school of about 960 students, and we have 2 nurses in the school. And that doesn't seem like a lot, but that's actually a lot more than some schools. Our union had to fight just to get a nurse in every school. And that was recently, as in like the past year and a half recently. So it's very important that when the teachers and the parents and the unions are saying, this is something we really need, and the students, because my students, they know from, you know, whatever, from their level, they can see exactly, and we need to listen to the students. So I'm actually really glad we do have a student on this panel as well, because I think that's a voice we really need to listen to. So thank you for letting me be here.
Thank you. All right, well, let's just move on to our student, Evelyn, and get a little view from the bottom.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah, I will start with, so when this all began, I think a lot of us were, first of all, expecting to be able to go back and not fully understanding the direness of the situation. So I'll start with that, and I think that influenced a lot of people's decision making within the first like week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks of this situation. And by that I mean, I know it was really hard to figure out how to work from home, and how to participate in my classes and keep up and not feel unmotivated, because I mean, obviously being in a classroom is a very special thing. You are there with, 20, 25, 30 other people that you're all working towards the same goal together. And so to lose that all of a sudden, and have to try this new thing that I've never done before, that was a strange experience for me. So I wanted to share that was my personal experience for the beginning. I think, so I'm part of the group called BSAC, Boston Student Advisory Council. And we're a group of students that works directly with the district to advise them as students. And we meet twice a week, so we kept that schedule going, and that was a nice rock for me. But a lot of the concerns that we brought up within those first couple of weeks were surrounding healthcare, and especially mental health of students, especially those who have identities that they are able to express at school that may come under fire at home. Or ways in which students express themselves among other young people that they don't have the chance to sort of explore and be with at home. So that's something that we thought about a lot, as well as how students were going to get food, and if they were going to face abuse at home, or I think, Merrie, you brought this up earlier, but just being re-traumatized by whatever their home situation is, because we already, students have to haul that trauma with them to school, and sometimes at school it gets a little alleviated because they don't have to reface it during the day, but then, the effect of that trauma is compounded over so much time. So that's something we thought about a lot, and sort of how to get counselors in contact with their students. I know at my school, they pretty quickly assembled a team of advisors and had each advisor take between 10 and 15 students that they would check on daily, and that was nice. But I also wish that it hadn't taken a pandemic for them to set that up. And I also, like, another thing that I faced, and this was maybe a couple weeks into the pandemic, so or into quarantine, I guess, but when we started this, there's a lot of college news coming out. That's a very senior specific problem, but there was a lot of college news coming out, and I had prepared before everything shut down to go meet with my college advisor, both the college advisors that I have at school, and I'm also part of the Bottom Line program, so I was going to meet with my college advisor there. And I didn't get to do that, and they would have helped me look over my financial aid, look over offers that I had from schools, and weigh the pros and cons and figure out what made the most sense and what didn't. And I'm lucky, my mom went to college, and so she was able to help me and walk me through that stuff. But obviously there are students who have parents who will look at that and say, I honestly don't know how to help you. And so how do we get these students, these seniors, to contact their guidance counselors or their college advisors when everybody is scrambling to figure out how they're going to make this work, whether they have kids or whatever their situation is at home, and B, how are they going to make them work for themselves, and then B, how are they going to make it work for the folks who are around them, and the folks that they have to serve, their students, and whatever youth that they are in contact with. What I will say is, I've seen, as more of a hopeful thing, but I've seen a lot of teachers start to reach out to their students a lot more. than before, which again is really nice. Wish that it didn't have to take a pandemic for it to happen, but I do appreciate that it's happening. But the district, different offices and departments within the district, teachers, administrators are all making more of an effort to ask for live feedback or ask for feedback before something happens and say, like, as a student, how do you see this? Can you evaluate it for us, please? Can you give us, hardcore feedback that we can take and then work on to make this really, try to hit the target on the first try. And that's really important. And I can't stress enough, it's nice, really wish it hadn't taken a pandemic to make it happen. Because it's so necessary. I mean, we are the ones on the receiving end of this system. And if it's not benefiting us, then what is it really working for? Yeah, I will stop there, but.
Thank you. It's quite moving to hear the actual voice of what it's like. All right, well, let's move to Zach Beers and move up into higher education. Actually, Evelyn made the connection between that seniors are on hold for that thing. So Zach, take it away.
Thanks. Yeah, and glad to be here with everyone. And Evelyn has been, fighting with, all of us for, has just been fighting for years, since you were young in high school. And yeah, it's just great to be with you. I had a whole thing I was going to say, I'm still going to say it, but you brought up such really important points. One is just the fundamental disruption for higher education that this whole thing is creating, and the advantage that our enemies are taking of that. It's their dream, really, to have this dislocation and to move remote, and and the leadership just isn't there. There is no plan to reopen colleges. It's everyone for themselves, and it makes it impossible for students, for people who are deciding which college to go to. How do you make that choice when you don't know if you're going to be in person? You don't know if you're going to be back, and we don't know where we're going to be with this pandemic, and that's really troubling. And then one of the the point about re-traumatization, that has been one of the main things we've been dealing with our organizers, is students who have found the freedom to be who they are at school, and really the first time they're away, like if you're at a residential college and you're actually away and you're able to be that person without the fear of abuse or just being in a home environment that isn't accepting of you, and getting that yanked away in 5 days has been really, really difficult for a lot of people. Yeah, those are two things that are, I could talk for, we could go forever. It's been a disaster, to be honest. So one thing that Merrie brought up, you were talking and it just kind of reminded me, the day of the Student Opportunity Act signing, I'm reminded of how far we have to go, because we walked into that building, to English High School, and we were allowed to walk around the metal detectors, right? If you were there to be at this ceremony, you could walk around the metal detectors. And then you walk into this auditorium and students come in, Black students, Latinx students, just like a sea of students of color, celebratory dance, band, just this wonderful environment. And then, what happens? But the white elected officials, the same elected officials who tried to fight for less, lecture these students about how this, this is all going to be better in the future. So the structural racism that we have so far to go. And that's just a deep embodiment. Higher ed funding is about healthcare. We have a story right in PHENOM. Our president of the PHENOM board, Amy Blanchette, worked at Bristol Community College until she was laid off. She was, paid for about 20 hours a week, worked 35 hours a week serving the students in the deepest need and helping them just get basic access to the campus. And it's sad because she was one of the first people laid off in this moment when she's needed the most. It wasn't let's hire more people and provide more supports. It's a layoff. But even worse, unemployment is actually right now better than her pay. So she now has time to take care of her own health. That's the situation we're in at our campuses. Being on unemployment has given her space to take care of her own health. The other side is, nurses and medical staff and all of the people who we need more than ever, are burdened by debt, are facing really hard, you know, it's like, do you want to go be a nurse? That's a really hard question when our public colleges aren't even there to help you get through without getting into massive debt. So that's just another way that the healthcare crisis is deeply intertwined with higher ed. Some good things, though, we have our Fund Our Future campaign ongoing. I think the most important thing is we can't make students and educators and families pay for this crisis. We started pivoting really quickly in March to solidarity, boosting campaigns for food and housing security. The MCAS, cancel MCAS. This year we started, you know, fighting for that and won that, and a variety of other things. And now really we're turning to our core mission of fully funding public education. So we are saying that this year we get that, you know, we're in a pandemic, but students and families and educators can't be the ones paying for this. So we need to fully fund the Student Opportunity Act as committed. We're demanding $120 million more as well for higher education, because we can't be laying people off and, you know, making education more expensive right now when we need it. When we have 20% unemployment, you need colleges that are there and ready to serve other people. And the most important thing, I'm not going to get into the 14 specifics because pick 5 and let's do it. We need the legislature to fully fund the state budget by taxing these rich people who've made billions of dollars during the pandemic. There's progressive revenue options. They're going after big corporations and rich people, and there's, you know, different ways. As you said, 14. Let's put a package together and say we're not going to cut billions of dollars. I'm also a Medford City Councilor. We need local and school aid to be fully funded by the state so that we're not firing and laying off teachers and nurses at our schools during this pandemic. So 2 things, I'm gonna hope that this works. If you can see this, oh no, it's not gonna work, but you can sign on to our demands at corona.fundourfuturema.org. And you can also share your story. One thing we're starting to do is collect video stories of why our schools and colleges can't afford cuts. And that's at meja.soapbox. That's soapbox with 2 X's.us. I will put this in the chat, or I'll send it to Cole to send out. And we will also have better links for these things in the future. But we are taking action online, bringing people together. And these are some tangible things that we really need folks to participate in. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll make sure that gets sent out. Let me just say, we're going to have a little few comments from our special guest, Carol Doherty. But before that, just a personal appeal. You know, we, in the groups that are organizing this, we will work as hard as we can in the state legislature to support your campaigns. But 40% of the Massachusetts federal budget comes from the United States government, right? And we need you to help us say, yeah, we don't need nuclear submarines. You know, we need NSF and NIH grants that pay funds for graduate students. And of course, this has been something we haven't been able to get. We haven't been able to get state organizations to get on board and say, yeah, we need to call on a US congressional delegation to bring more of our tax dollars back to the state. So we have with us Carol Doherty. She was the president of the MTA. Most of you are too old to remember the Jobs with Peace campaign, but President Reagan also remilitarized the economy like Trump has in a way. And we had a campaign to try to take the military money, put it back into housing, education, and having Carol, the MTA, opened it up to us. Now she's going to be in the state legislature. Carol, why don't you just introduce yourself for those folks here too young to have been there in those days?
While I was campaigning, I have a lot of young people in the campaign, and we were talking about, well, what big name person can endorse you? I was sitting near this high school student, and I said, well, I think I can reach out to Michael Dukakis and ask him. I'm sure he would. And the kid said, who? So the Jobs with Peace campaign is in my past and in Jonathan's and perhaps in many others. And so I fought the fight, and I fought the good fight on many fronts over a lot of years, and particularly on the education front. And like Merrie, very much visible. It was back then, it was Proposition 2.5, and we were trying to save resources, but we were trying to save our schools and save jobs, and yet hundreds of schools closed during those years, and thousands of teachers lost their jobs. And I think that it took a decade or more for public education to recover from that setback. And just talking about it gives me the chills, because the scenario is the same. I mean, you know, you've said it. I came in on the tail end of Merrie's comments, but agree with what I've heard. I'm in the fight and will continue to be in the fight alongside you, because it has been my life, championing public education in many fronts and in many different ways. We have just come from a very difficult, I'm on the school board, and a very difficult school board meeting where we have cut, now I didn't vote for the budget, but $5.9 million was cut from the budget. The superintendent asked for a level funding budget. We feel that he should have asked for full funding. He did not do that. It was a $96 million budget. 288 pink slips have gone out across all of the unions in the district, from custodians to groundskeepers to library assistants, with an inordinate amount of cuts in kind of equally in the teacher unit, as well as the teaching assistants and secretaries as well. So it's devastating. And we have heard from we've heard many voices, many suggestions, and the voices that we've heard from the staff, particularly in the community, start out with, we understand that these are difficult times. I think that the understanding that there are difficult times needs to pull people together to say, no, we're going to go to the wall for full funding of our school budget. And I feel basically the same way around the Student Opportunity Act, looking at that for so many years, 2 or 3 years, so excited when it was finally adopted, only to learn that there was no line item in the budget to support it, hoping that the revenue stream would be a good revenue stream to support the first year at least of the SOA, and nobody expected a pandemic. And so we are all coping with, struggling with what it is that we do next. We have also begun our conversation here around reentry. I can only throw my hands up and say, we have no money. We're laying off teachers, we're laying off nurses, we're laying off teaching assistants. How are we going to reopen school in the fall in the way in which the various bureaucracies want us to do, and afford to pay for that and put our children and our staff at risk? It's a conundrum. I'm a very positive person, and so I like to say at the end of all of this, the Chinese symbol for crisis and opportunity is the same. Do we see this as an opportunity with limited funding or a complete crisis? I mean, we need to move forward. We need to hold fast around the things that we think are really critical and important to our students, to our teachers, and to our communities. And as I said, I'm there. I've fought the good fight. We've won some of those battles. We've kept at many of them, and we'll keep on keeping on. So I appreciate the remarks that all of you have made in regard to the concerns that you're confronting in the overall and in the places where you focus your work and your energy. And I'm new in the legislature, but not new to the fight.
Okay.
I'm sorry about all of the fussing that I made about we've had so many technical problems today with the computers. Anyway, here I am.
It's great to have you with us. Great to have you in the legislature.
Thank you. Merrie, for
why don't you handle questions or comments for the panelists that have come in?
I'll do my best.
I want to give a big round of applause to all the panelists. We heard from some incredible leaders of our education justice movement here in Massachusetts, where so many of our issues intersect, right, in our public schools and in our education justice movement. Let's jump right into some of the specific concrete questions. We didn't get a whole bunch yet in the Q&A. One good question perhaps for Suzie and Evelyn: what difference will it make in your class if MCAS is canceled for this coming year and perhaps the next several years during the, in the context of the COVID crisis. So if either of you want to speak to that, Suzie or Evelyn, or both.
I would love to speak to that, and I'd love to hear what Evelyn has to say as well. First of all, yes, if the MCAS has a huge impact on my students and their families and on our school community. I've taught for a long time. I've taught way before No Child Left Behind. I've been teaching since 1992.
Wow.
And so I was around before all of that, and I was a child before there was all of this, focus on testing. I always took standardized testing, but it goes without saying, I think anybody who's a bit younger than I am doesn't even know what education used to be. And I know, once again, I'll say Jose Vilson's book, This Is Not a Test, that says it's a very well-written book about education. And, even his title of his book is This Is Not a Test. And each year of a child's life is not a test. It's an actual year of their life. And if we're spending it trying out and tinkering with these MCAS and trying to figure out what assessments, are going to hold some party accountable, we are not going to get too far. And I'll just say that, it's been devastating what I've seen happen since about the year 2002 with the real huge focus on testing and punishment. Schools have become a place that, and trust me, teachers aren't scared of tests. We actually love to know where our students are, but we don't like to have a standardized test that sort of rules over every aspect of the school. And I'll just give my own school as an example. With over 900 students, more than half of those students are English language learners. If they're newcomers, that means they just came to this country. They might be taking the math MCAS that year. So imagine you go to Portugal and you're taking a Portuguese standardized math test. Now, you might know the math, but as we know, math has a lot of reading in it. And by the second year, you're taking the English language arts test, or let's say you're in Portugal, or let's say you're in Japan, and you're taking a standardized test in that language. Every class I've been to about English language learning, about language acquisition, they say it takes 5 to 6 years to get academic language. Why are we forcing? So that makes me second guess what the purpose of these tests are. So I just think for those students, it would make a huge difference. I know people who have specific learning disabilities or just not the ability to take tests well, it would make a huge difference in their life, because I think I counted up one day with a reporter from the Bay State Banner, and I can't remember the exact number of full school days my school was spending on testing, because it's not just the days the tests are given. That's a few days out of the school year, but we have practice tests, we have practice for the practice tests, and then practically every teacher meeting is focused around making sure that we are getting the standards ready. So when I hear Evelyn saying it would have been nice if, teachers have been able to pay attention to thus and such before the pandemic, well, unfortunately, it takes up a lot of teachers' time focusing on those, the tests and all of the stuff that comes before it. So it does become quite a distraction, and it's unfortunate. So I think it will make a huge difference. I'm a big proponent just to get rid of MCAS for a lot of different reasons. And so I'll just stop at that.
Yeah, so it's okay, multiple costs and some unseen costs to this testing system. Evelyn, you want to speak to that, about your own vision of how that might impact high school classes?
Sure. I'll just add that. So I think definitely there is a lot of time spent preparing for the test. That feels like a waste of time that we could be using to do a million other things. But to me, it feels like there's less focus on that preparation in high school. It's more when I was little, specifically like 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th grade, that I was just like, hey, I want to do something else. I don't want to take this test. or whatever. But there's that. And then there's also, you don't really see or maybe fully understand at the time, but later on when you're looking at students who go off into advanced work class, or those pathways that you get access to if you score high enough on the MCAS, like you notice who gets that and who doesn't. Yeah, that's all.
Thank you so much. And Evelyn, I have a follow-up question for you, and Merrie or Lisa may want to jump in. This current historical moment, we see a massive clarion call for defunding the police, right? This huge issue of police violence, and millions have taken to the streets across the nation. And a lot of folks are saying we got to get police out of schools, defund the police, and move the money to, under-resourced communities, to schools, as I hear many of you all talking about the need for funds in schools. Is there a next step beyond that? How can schools spend money to combat the school-to-prison pipeline or institutional racism? How do we go beyond just defending schools as public institutions, which we have to do against the charter proponents and the privatizers, to really hitting racism in the schools and transforming things? So I don't know if you want to speak about what BSAC has done on school-to-prison pipeline, or what you see, or what your thoughts are. I know that's a lot, sorry.
No, that's all good. That's absolutely fine. So I'll begin with saying absolutely 100% we need to defund the police, and that money needs to go to more worthwhile causes and the places that actually need it. In terms of what schools can do with the money, we can finally put in ethnic studies. We can make class sizes smaller so that students can get more one-on-one attention from their teachers. We can upgrade our facilities, which are gross, and have like 40-year-old heating systems. Like, what is in Roxbury, for example? So my school is in Roxbury. My school is really old, the building. The heating system is disgusting. Roxbury is known to have some of the highest rates of asthma in the city. A lot of our students live in Roxbury. Speaking about healthcare, what are we doing sending kids with asthma to a school that can't, clean air?
Right.
It just, some like basic things, like we need XYZ to focus in school, XYZ isn't funded. So that we could, stop using textbooks that have outdated information. We could put in the climate curriculum that BSAC designed, or any other climate curriculum that exists, because we don't have that. We could expand class opportunities and actually make the city our classroom and send people out to learn things in other places. We could get rid of the exam schools with more funding, because then people would recognize, and I'm not saying that right now other schools aren't a good option, because a lot of schools are good options that are not the exam schools, but people recognize the exam schools as better options because they have more money. There's a whole list. We can get guidance counselors.
Right. Sounds like
a whole more.
That's a vision to end on, actually, kind of the road forward.
I think, what should we try to do, one or two more? A lot of questions started coming in that they're not directed at specific speakers. I don't know if Merrie or Lisa had any follow-up thoughts to that, or if there is.
I just want to second everything Evelyn said about the need to get police out of schools, and what could those resources be better used for. Like, she really described it so beautifully and concretely. And it's like, schools are a microcosm of the larger society. So all the things that people are talking about defunding the police in general, and how, we could spend that money on addressing people's health needs and mental health needs, and, housing homeless, whatever, apply in school settings as well. There's just so much better use that could be made of those resources that would have a better outcome for students and everyone. So I just thank you, Evelyn, for describing that so well.
Amen.
Absolutely. Thank you, Lisa.
We're at 8:05. We try to respect the fact that people listening in have other pressures on them. This was incredible. We could obviously keep on going for hours. I'm not sure that we probably should have another session later on in the summer when we know a little more what's going to happen in the fall and the legislature. So I just want to thank all of you. So good to have you aboard. We do have a petition, Fund Healthcare, Not Warfare. We'll send it out to you or a link to it. We hope you'll sign it to try to build some momentum to get more federal funding that supports things like education, less funding for wars abroad. So thank you all, and stay safe, stay well.
Thanks, Jonathan. Thanks, everybody.
Good night. Thank you.
Congratulations, Carol.